Hello, and welcome to History with Archer, Ben, and Ellie. Today we will be teaching you about war crimes and the Geneva Convention during World War II. During World War II, many countries had committed war crimes, and just like any crime, justice was in order. Before justice could be served, rules had to be put in place to say what was right and what was wrong, who could be punished and who could be let free. The Geneva Convention was a meeting between many different countries. During the convention, they decided on how to treat prisoners of war. They ended up revising 3 treaties and creating a 4th at each of the 4 conventions. Each of the treaties was ratified by 196 parties. This set standards that many countries were to follow, and if a country broke a rule of the Geneva Convention, it was to be considered a war crime. If a war crime was committed at the end of the war, the person or the people that committed the crime would be put to trial, just like in court.
Before the Geneva Convention, many prisoners of war were experimented on, starved, and ultimately abandoned. During World War II, the Axis powers had committed many different war crimes, and each Axis country had to pay for it. Japan had the most war crimes, such as inhumane treatment of prisoners of war, crimes of torture, murders of prisoners of war, mass murder of civilian population, rape, looting, and use of poisonous weapons. One of the most well-known war crimes is the Bataan Death March. The march consisted of Japanese Imperial Army marching about 60,000 to 80,000 Filipino and American prisoners from Bataan to Pampanga. After 3 months, about 2,500 to 10,000 Filipinos and 100 to 650 Americans died. We are yet unsure of how many died and how many escaped. Although Italy had not been punished for any crimes, they still had to stand trial for disrupting the peace for countries they had invaded. Germany committed many crimes, including crimes against peace planning, crimes against peace itself, and waging war of aggression. As punishment for their crimes, Germany was forced to do several things, including give land back to France, pay for damages, and admit guilt to starting the war. The Nazis and many high-ranking German officials were specifically punished in 1949 with what we call the Nuremberg trials. 185 people were charged, but 12 received the death sentence. Adolf Hitler had committed suicide before the trials could ever begin, and he, along with 2 other high-ranking German men, would never have received their punishment. Hungary was another country with 2 counts of genocide. And for those who do not know, genocide is the mass killing of a group of people, specifically a nation or an ethnic group.
Most of the United States war crimes were cases of men deliberately killing Japanese men whom had already surrendered, the torture of prisoners of war, and at least 3 massacres. Although Allied powers did commit war crimes, they did not get such a harsh punishment. Most of the cases were ignored or had very little punishment. To the victor goes the spoils. To wrap things up, war crimes were typically dealt with accordingly, and the Geneva Convention brought a new light on the treatment of prisoners of war. World War II has really changed the methods and the course of war.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe. Warsaw, Berlin, Prague, Vienna, Budapest, Belgrade, Bucharest, and Sofia. All these famous cities and the populations around them lie in what I must call the Soviet sphere. And all are subject, in one form or another, not only to Soviet influence, but to a very high and in some cases increasing measure of control from Moscow. There never was a war in his easier to prevent by timely action than the one which had just desolated such great areas of the globe. It could have been prevented, in my belief, without the firing of a single shot. And Germany might be powerful, prosperous, and honored today. But no one would listen. And one by one we were all sucked into the awful whirlpool. And surely, ladies and gentlemen, I put it to you, surely we must not let that happen again.
That the forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations. the flags of freedom fly all over Europe.
This has been History with Archer, Ben, and Ellie.